Okay guys, so welcome back again. So in this video, let's do a quick tutorial on handling forms using Formik and React. So for this video, what I've done is this, that I've created a very basic React application using npx create react app. That is using the create react app package. I've created this React application and I've made this very simple UI that has only two input fields, that is the name and the email of the user or whatever it is. And then if we have a look at the package.json file, we have two dependencies here, Formik, that would be used to handle forms inside React. And then we have one more dependency that I've installed doing npm I Formik and npm I up. And this is basically for validation of the fields inside the form. So this is the library I'm using that is called yup, and and whenever you are using Formik, I would suggest you to use yup for the field validations, because like they are like brother in arms. So for this video, again, what I've done is this, that inside the app.js component, I'm simply rendering out this simple form component. That is this simple form here, this one here. Let me minimize the sidebar here because I do not need this anymore. And one thing more before going ahead, I have started the application by doing npm start so that I'm seeing this page here. And inside this simple form.js file, I have a very simple functional component here called simple form, and then I have a function here called handle submit. Currently it takes in an event here, and we are simply preventing the default behavior of the form here. And then inside here, these class names are only for styling purposes, the styles which you see here, and these styles come from this file here. That is all the styles are present inside index.css file. So if you are going to use the same styling, you can copy the CSS files from my repository here. And now let me close this, and let me close also the package.json file. So now here inside the container, we have a div with a class name of form. And then inside that div, we have a form here, a very simple form here with the heading here that says Formik tutorial. And then we have two form controls here, or form fields here, that is for the name itself and for the email itself. And I've hard coded the error message here, that is name is required. And here I've also hard coded the message here, that is email is required. So we are going to conditionally show this error messages dependent on whether the fields are valid or not. And then we simply have the submit button and we have the reset button. So if we click on reset, we see that everything is resetted here. And it is like the default behavior. If you create a button inside a form with a type of reset, it resets the form. But all this we will be doing using Formik. So now to convert this form into a Formik form, what we need to do, we need to import two things from Formik. That is the Formik component. And there are a couple of ways you can use Formik using the Formik hook also, that is the use Formik form. But what I'm going to show you is this, that this is the way you are going to use Formik in 99% of the cases. And I suppose that this is the easiest way to use Formik. So we need to import two things from Formik, that is Formik, form from Formik, like this. And then we need to import everything from yup. So import all as yup, yup from yup, that is for the field validations. So firstly, what I'm going to do, I'm going to comment out this handle submit function from here. And here what I'm going to do, I need a couple of things. So we need three things here. That is, we need to handle the submission of the form. That is, if the form is valid, we need to have a function that would get all the values from the form. Then we can also provide in Formik the initial values of the form, because like say, suppose if this is an edit form inside your application, then you want to pre-fill the values inside the name and email field, then you can use the initial values thing. So therefore we are going to provide the initial values also. And then we want to have the validation schema also. So firstly, let's dive into the validation schema and the initial values. So initially, what do we want to have as our initial values for our form? So let's say initial values equal to email, because we eventually want to have the email of the user, as well as we also want to have the name of the user, like this. So these are the initial values of the form which would be pre-filled inside this form which we see here. And now we need to define the validation schema for these fields. So we can say const validation schema equal to yup dot object dot shape. That is, we are defining the shape of the final values that we want to get from this form. So we can see we want to have a name field and we want to define a validation schema for this. So we can say this should be yup dot string, that is the name should be a string and it should be required here. That is, we always want to have the name field as required. Secondly, we can target the email field here. So we can again say yup dot string dot email, that is email field should be a type of email and this should be again required. So this is a very simple validation schema and you can do a lot more with yup package to define like complex validation schemas. But here I'm keeping it very simple. That is to have the initial values as an empty strings and the validation schema for both the fields are these two things here. That is name is required and email should be an email as well as it should be required. And then we want to create a function here. So let me create a function here. So function handle submit. So handle submit. That is what do we want to do when the form is submitted. And here it takes in a couple of values, but for now let's leave it as an empty. Let's keep it as an empty parameters here and with an empty body here. So now let me remove this handle submit function from here. And now we'll start using this Formik components. That is the Formik and the form components that are imported from Formik. So the first thing which you need to do, you need to wrap your form component, that is this form or form HTML element, that is this that starts with this thing here and ends with this thing here. So you need to wrap this inside the Formik component that we imported from Formik. So we can say Formik like this, and then we need to wrap this form HTML element inside Formik here. The second thing which you need to do, you need to instead of using this form component or form HTML element directly, what you can do, you can simply use the form component here from Formik, because otherwise you need to put in these values here, that is on submit, on blur, and so on and so forth. So instead of doing all that, what we can do, we can simply remove this form HTML element and we can simply remove this on submit event handler here and we can simply provide in form here. And we see that we have the ending brackets or ending tags as form here. So this thing, this is what you need to do. And the last thing which you need to do is to provide some props to this Formik component, and that is it requires 3 props at least. So initial values would be the initial values that we created. So initial values. Then we need to provide it a validation schema. So either we can we have a couple of things that we can manually validate it, but the best way to use Formik is to use with yup, that is to define a validation schema using yup and then use that as the validation schema for the form. So I'm going to use this prop here, that is validation schema, would be this validation schema that we created, that is this schema. And then we need to have the on submit prop here, that is what should be called when we submit the form. So we can say handle submit here like this. So let's save this. So nothing changes here because we are not handling the fields inside the form here, but we see that if we write something here, we do not see anything. So basically this handle submit, when we use it as the on submit event handler, takes in 2 things here, that is the values and the actions, or form help, or we can say helpers. Instead of actions we can say helpers. So these are the actual values that that you can use to post it to your backend server, or you can do the you can do whatever you want to do with the actual form values. So for now let me simply log it here. So console.log values like this. So if I save it, nothing changes here because we see that we are not getting those values here. So what we can do, we need to target these these individual form fields here, that is this input element with a type of text and ID of name, and this input element with a type of text and ID of email. So the basic thing you need to do when using Formik and this form component is to provide a name to your individual input elements that should be referenced by these keys here, that is name and email. So since this is a name input element, so what we can do, we can give this an HTML thing here, name called name, and the same thing we can do it for the email here, that is name would be equal to email like this. And now we need to provide in 3 more things to this input element, that is the current value. So current value we can get from the Formik props here or the Formik render props here. So before defining in the values, what I would like to show you is this, that instead of simply providing this form as a child component of this Formik component, we want to use the render props method. So instead, we do it like this. What we can say, we can use the render props thing here, that is props like this, and then we can simply return something from here. And what we can return this form element from here or form component from here. So we can do it this way, like this. Everything works well. And now before doing anything, let me simply log in the props here just to make you understand that what exactly I'm doing. So if I do this thing here, so if I save this, we see that we get some values here. So let me increase the size here. So if I expand this, we see that we have a couple of properties here inside this props object here. That is the errors. That is the errors here. We should be having the values here. So currently we see that the value is this thing here. So let me increase the font size. So we see that the name is an empty string, email is an empty string. And then we have the errors object here, which we see here, that is name is required, email is required. And then we have the handle blur and the handle change and the handle reset. So what we can do, we can provide the value from this values thing, from this values thing here. So what we can do inside this name input field, what we can say the current value of this field would be props dot values dot name, like this. So let me save it so it should like better format itself. And the same thing we can do for the email thing, that is the value should be props dot values dot name. So if I save this, we see that nothing changes here inside the form. And now to make this thing work, that is this input element work, and to change the values as we type on, because currently if I go here and if I type in something inside this name field, we see that we are not able to type because we need to handle the on change event and the on blur event on this input field. So what we can say, we can do it like this, that is on change. We can simply say props dot handle change, and on blur we can say props dot handle blur, like this. And the same thing we need to do for the email field itself. So we can do it like this. So if I save this, everything should be working fine. And just ignore this error messages because we would be handling them in a moment. So let me clear up the console. So if I type something here, we see that we get the same thing here, and inside the email field itself, and it should be like the value of the email field should be values.email and not values.name. So if I save this and if I reload the page, we can type in the name here. So let me type in truly metal, and let me type in, let's say, yours truly at gmail.com. So if I see at the very bottom here, that is this from this log statement on line number 23, the props, we see that we have the values here. That is, this is the values here, that is the email here and the name here. And if I see here the error object here, we see that now we have an empty error object here. But now let me reload the page, and let me increase the size here. So if I expand this, we see that currently the errors are empty, whereas the values are also empty. So if I simply submit it, we see that now what we get, we see that we get the error object pre-filled here that says that name is a required field and email is a required field. And the values are name is empty string and email is an empty string. So if we simply provide in the name here, and now if we have a look at the props object here from line number 28, we can see that we have one error here. That is, email is required because name is there. So only email is required, and values are name is truly and email is an empty string. So how do we show the error conditionally here? So it is pretty simple to do. So instead of rendering out like this, that is directly what I can do, I can render it out conditionally. So we can say props dot errors. So errors dot name and props.touched.name. That is only show the errors if this field has been touched. Then only we want to show this thing here. And instead of providing in the hard-coded text here, we can simply say props.errors.name, simply like this. So if we save this, we see that now the error message is gone because it is going to be rendered conditionally. So if I simply remove the name from here, we see that now we get this message here, that is name is a required field. And as soon as I type it, we see that the error message is gone. And the same thing we can do for the email field. So let me simply copy it from here. And instead of this thing, let me simply provide it this thing here. And here, instead of name, I can simply change it to email like this. And if I save it, we see that email is a required field because this field has been touched. So let me provide in a valid email address. So currently it is not a valid email address. So if I do it this way, we see that the error is gone. So what I can do, I can simply reload the page. So currently we see that we see that name is an empty string and email is an empty string here, and we do not see any error because we haven't touched the form yet. So as soon as I touch the input element here called name, and if I simply remove my focus from here, so let me remove my focus from here, we see that immediately we get this error message here, that is name is a required field. And that is why we have used this thing here, that is if we have touched this name field, only then show the error message. So now we get this error message, and the same thing we can verify it for the email itself. So I have touched the email field here, and if I simply focus out from the email field, we see that email is a required field. So now let me simply put in the name here, and for the email, let me put in the valid email here. And now we see that both the errors are gone. And now if I simply press submit, we see that from line number 17, so let's scroll to line number 17, we see that we have these values here that are like all sanitized and like validated values from your validation schema. So we have these values here. And if you want to show a loading spinner or something like that, what you can do, you can use the form.submitting prop, and you can use this helpers from here. So if I simply log the helpers here, that is what all is coming inside these helpers. So you can do much more with helpers here. So if I simply submit it, we see that this is coming from line number 18, that is the helpers here. So here we have a couple of functions here, that is to reset the form, to manually set the errors, to manually set the field value, and so on and so forth. And you can have a look into detail about this by going to the Formik page. But I'm not going to go into the details. I just made a reference to it. So this is all what is needed to use Formik inside any of your application. And let me fix this thing here, that is stringify. So here what I can do, I can simply say props.values. So if I save this, we see that this is the values here from this form. As we type here, we see that we get the values here. So now one more thing that I would like to focus upon is this, that currently we see that in both the input elements, that is this input element and this input element, we are like repeating ourselves. That instead of this name attribute, which is different for both the input fields, that is name and name is email here, that is these two lines are different. But these lines, that is value on change and on blur, value on change and on blur, they are both similar inside these input elements. So what we can do, we can simplify our forms pretty much by using one more component from this Formik package, and that is the field component. So I can simply import field from here, and let me also import the error message component from this Formik thing. So instead of providing an input like this, what I can do, I can simply replace this input with a field thing from here, from Formik, that is the field component. And here I need to simply provide in the name attribute like this. So if I save this, everything should work fine. So if I reload the page, we see that we do not see an error. If I focus out, we see that we get an error here. So this all you can write in simply one line here. And moreover, In the same way, we imported this error message from here, and we can see that the error messages currently have the same same they are both same for both the input elements. Only the thing that differs is the this thing here, that is the value name or the value key. So what we can do, we can simply say error message like this, and name would be name like this, same as before. So if we save this, we see that now we get this error message in black, but we can style it according to our class name here called error. So what we can do, we can simply provide it a class name called error like this. So let's save this, and now we see that we do not see this in color here. So what more we can do, we can simply provide it as a component here. So component would be P, and now we see that we get the error message in the same way as we were getting before. And in the similar way, we can use the thing inside the HTML input element for the email field. So let me comment it out. So we simply need to provide in the field here, and we simply need to provide in the name value here. And here we can provide in the name as email, and the similar thing for the error message. So let me copy the error message from here. So let me copy it from here and let me paste it here. And name this time would be email, because we are referencing the email error and not the name, not the this field error. So now if I save this, everything should work fine as before. So if we do not provide the name, we get the error. So let me provide in the name. So let me provide in the email. So if I simply submit it, we see that we are not able to submit it because email is required. So if I provide in the email here, we see that we can submit the form here. So if I submitted the form, we see that we get this message from line number 17. So guys, this is like a basic overview of using Formik inside any of your applications. And I've kept this tutorial very simple so that you can get started with Formik, because there is a lot more that you can do with Formik. And not only this much, because there are like checkboxes, the radio buttons, the select input. So there are a couple of things, but I've tried not to touch them because I wanted to keep this tutorial very simple for all those who want to begin with Formik. So guys, that's all about this video. So if you like the video, do hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, do subscribe to the channel. So thank you, bye bye, tata, take care, and have a good day and have a great day.